Hey everyone, I'm going to get started here in just a moment. This is going to be a live Q&A on the theme of inner peace. So this is going to be less didactic, meaning less me teaching straight up and more responding to some questions that arise. So one, if you have questions, I'm going to get through as many as I can. Also, feel free to share where you're tuning in from in the comments. We got TikTok on this side and we got Instagram on this side. So welcome everyone. As you've probably seen, I do have an online retreat coming up this weekend, and the theme is inner peace. So I've been talking a lot more about it right now. I just pinned the link in the comments, so if you want to learn more about that retreat. So start brainstorming any questions you might have around this topic, the topic of anything that comes to mind when you consider inner peace. And we could also go a little off track, any questions kind of related to that. Let me start by framing this theme and why I think it's very important. Obviously, something like inner peace is very important, but I think it can get overlooked and sort of written off as just sometimes even like a selfish orientation, like inner peace, focusing on my own inner world, my own thoughts, my own emotions, my own happiness. Some of us can have a complicated relationship to that endeavor, and something like inner peace can actually feel, at first glance, like disconnected from perhaps the realities of the world, our relationships to other people, our work, things that we care about, that we feel a sense of purpose toward. And what I do see for many people is like a bypassing of one's own inner world and one's inner relationship, one's relationship to themselves and their inner world, and just put focus outward. And there's a certain wisdom to that, because if we take the orientation that we are connected to a larger whole, certain spiritual traditions will actually make their primary orientation to be service, and like not so much a disconnection from the self, but like putting the attention elsewhere, as a form of transcending the self, connecting to a larger, more interconnected version of ourselves. But there's a fine line between doing that and using our attention and putting our attention outward as a form of bypassing what's uncomfortable here and what is unresolved in ourselves. And when it comes to the impact that developing an inner contentment and fulfillment has, it is not just that you get to like now move through your life with a little bit more ease. This impacts everything in your life. And I'll give you a few examples of why I think that happens, or how it does happen. Let's just start with your own relationship. Let's say a romantic relationship. Could be friendships, familial relationships, but looking at it in the context of an intimate partnership. So many of the ideas that subconscious ideas we have when we come into a partnership is some sort of belief that this person is going to make me whole or complete or happier. And let's just keep it simple, saying like an expectation that this person in this relationship will make me happier, which is a fair expectation. But when we come in with that sort of like almost codependence, it becomes very tricky territory. It becomes a very slippery slope of subconsciously manipulating a person or needing them to be a certain way in order for us to be okay. And it's a beautiful thing to grow alongside someone in a certain acceptance of oneself and a learning about oneself. And I'm a strong proponent of the value of relationships for doing inner work. There's certain things that are just not going to arise outside of relationship. I mean, we're social beings and we're wired for connection and attachment. So there's certain things that only arise within partnership, and especially intimate partnership can really bring up a lot of unresolved things within us. So there's a ton of learning that can happen alongside, but it requires a conscious awareness of continuing to look at all of the different ways that I am depending on another person for my own sense of contentment, to fill some wounds that I have about not being good enough, not being lovable, that I might be abandoned. And when we're talking about this journey toward inner peace, we're really talking about mending a relationship with yourself and developing an internal container that is able to be steady, grounded, and connected to a sense of love and contentment and fulfillment that is less dependent upon and contingent upon the momentary experiences that move through our awareness throughout the day and throughout our life, which includes the people who are in our lives. And so as you start taking the journey, and you could even say like a responsibility for your own well-being, for your own mind, recognizing that you are the only person who can relate to your thoughts, who can relate to your pain, who can relate to your existential fears and worries. The big turning point in any person's path is the recognition that like that is you. You are the one who has to interact with that. You can have support, you can have people who care about you, you can have people who empathize, you can have people who create a sense of safety for you to do that work, absolutely. But it's you who has to do it. And there's something that can be scary about that recognition, and there's something deeply empowering and liberating about realizing that you actually have I'm going to say like a radical influence. And I will sometimes go, and I will go as far as to say complete influence over your internal world if you choose to learn how to work with it. And so as you start down that path and you start to work with your emotional history, you start to look at wounds that, let's just say like early in childhood, there was an abandonment, you didn't get the love that you needed, and it just keeps this subconscious hole within you that causes you to make decisions outwardly that are trying to fill that. You don't realize it. Most of the time we don't realize it. It's like, why do I want to start like this big business and build an empire and make billions of dollars? There is a form of that potentially coming from just a natural energetic life force of like creation and growth and service. And there's also, and oftentimes, especially when it's like dominate, is coming from a place of like we felt powerless at some point in our lives. And so we're constantly looking for ways to get back in a place of feeling powerful. And this can show up in our relationships in other ways. Like we didn't get the love, and so we're depending on another person to become something that we didn't get when we were younger. And because of that, now all the ways that we relate to another person happen through the lens of like, oh, they did this. Does this mean that they don't love me anymore? And then we go into like argument, like, how dare you talk to this person? Like, who do you think you are? Like, I knew you would leave me, sort of thing. And then the other person's just like, wait, where is that coming from? It's like, and then, then we get triggered and we blend with an old part. It's just like, you know what you're talking about. Like, you know what you're doing. And do you see, I'm actually not exaggerating. Like, that can absolutely happen and often does happen. And in more serious ways can like, you can really like disconnect from the reality of what's here and regress into a wound of a younger part of you that is in some sense just grasping for the conditions that will make you feel safe and loved. And so as you take that journey and do that inner work of feeling the love that moves through you, the inherent love that you have access to, that we all have access to that is beyond just the conditions that are moving through us. When you do the work of seeing all the different ways that you get triggered, your conditioning that arises, and seeing that you are not those triggers, that there's a way for you to experience that and then relax into the spaciousness of who you are, so that your identity is more vast and whole. As you connect more to that, you no longer subconsciously or consciously depend on another person to make you feel whole or to fill a certain gap that was there because of a wound that happened earlier on. And so this allows you to then have a conversation with your partner in a way that you can remain grounded and you can remain open, and they can share something. And instead of it triggering this whole story about what it means about you, it's like, oh no, they're sharing an expression of their truth, even if it's uncomfortable for me. And I can hold that because I'm remaining in my truth. And this is how two humans come together who are not codependent. They're two fully expressed beings choosing to support each other's full expression, not two beings who are controlling and manipulating the other person to be a certain way so that they feel safe and protected, which is how most relationships unfold and the heart of most relationship problems. And this will show up in friendships. This will show up at work. And so the interesting thing I've found with taking the work into taking the path into developing an inner contentment is that a lot of stuff that used to be triggering or activating kind of takes care of itself as you create a beautiful internal world that just it pours over into everything else in your life, and you're no longer activated by so many things that beforehand you required to be a certain way in order to feel okay. So this is just a top level orientation and one facet of it about how something like the journey toward inner peace is not a selfish orientation. It impacts everything in your life, and often in a very organic way. But I'd love to take some questions. I'm seeing some stuff come up in the comments now. I'm going to scroll back through since I've been talking for quite a bit. Let's see. So, I know that my biggest enemy is me, and my problem is I don't know how to convince myself not to overthink or judge myself too much. Cool. Let's focus on a couple things there. One, my biggest enemy is me. I imagine I understand what you mean by that. And I would also just look at the framing of that internally. Language is important, and words hold a certain charge to them. And when we start taking the orientation that there's a part of me that is an enemy to myself, well, you're setting the stage for war. What is an enemy? Someone who is trying to attack you. How do you historically work with enemies in a traditional sense? You attack back. And so if you are the enemy to yourself, and that's the framing that you have, well, you're already setting yourself up for failure, because there's no way you can win. Someone has to die in the relationship. And at the very least, parts of you are going to continue to be at war with yourself. So I think we need to first shift the framing of it from I am my own enemy to something more along the lines of I have different parts of me that have different conflicting needs. From that perspective, nothing is wrong. There are just different aspects of you that are trying to get certain things. And when there's not proper communication between the internal family, it does it is perceived as like, oh, like there's a part of me that knows I want this and wants to be in a loving relationship and accepted and like fully surrendered to another person. Like I know that, I feel that deeply. And then there's another part of me, the enemy, that every time I get into that, I sabotage and I make the other person wrong, and it gets really good. And then as soon as it gets good, I flip it because I get scared and I feel like I'm going to be abandoned, and I never let anything escalate to something that's beautiful that I really want. All right. And so we perceive that as like, well, here's this part, this saboteur that is ruining my life. Well, how's it going to unfold if you're just taking that relationship to that part, that is a saboteur, that is the enemy, I know what I really want, and this part is ruining me. Every time that arises, that part that like sabotages, we're going to come in now and go to the equivalent of like, F you, I hate you, what's wrong with you, why can't you get this right, like stop doing this. This is the internal war. And what does that internal war do? Does it make that part just go, oh, you're right, like I have been doing the wrong thing and I am an idiot, and like, yeah, I'll let you follow the path that your heart really wants? No, that's not how it works. That part is convinced that what it is doing is in service of you. Why would it sabotage? Is it just this malicious part that is trying to torment you and ruin your life? No, the system doesn't work like that. All these different parts have some positive intention, even if we can't perceive it. In that case, the positive intention could be, we've had an open heart before. And when we did, we let someone else in, and then they left, and then we were heartbroken and we experienced great pain. And we didn't have the resources to hold the pain because we were 6 years old and we were supposed to get love from the person that was supposed to love us the most, and we didn't. And it was terrifying and it was hard and it felt like we were going to die, and I never want to experience that again. So, developed a part that comes in anytime something gets too good, or we get too open, or it's perceived like there's going to be some vulnerability, because we're like allowing someone into our world. And as soon as that happens, it sabotages the experience so that it can't go further and ruin us and put us into pain and suffering anymore. Well, when you look at it from that perspective, it doesn't seem like it's trying to ruin you. It actually seems like it's trying to save you. It's trying to help you. It's coming from a place of love and care and protection. If we start from that ground, well, that is a very different way of orienting to our internal experience, and is going to require a different approach to work with that. If there's like a friend in your life who is standing up for you anytime someone like looks like they're crossing a boundary, and they come in and they say, hey, don't hurt my friend. And they do it with the, like from a place of like love and care, like for you, but like a fierceness to the outside world. Are you just gonna like tell that friend, I hate you, I hate you, I hate you, what's wrong with you? No, like you can see the love that's there, and instead go like, hey, it's okay, like I'm okay, I can hold my experience, I appreciate you looking out for me, but I can navigate this. You have to have a conversation with that friend. You have to talk to it. You have to let it know that that you actually have the resources to navigate what's arising. And then the friend can go, okay, like I'm still gonna be here in case you need me, like I got your back, but like I see now that you actually have the ability to navigate that. And so we take that perspective then with the certain saboteur part of us, and start to have that different orientation to it in a way that shows it that we actually do have new resources to hold the potential for pain that could arise. When you're 6, when you're 5, when you're 4, when you're 3, or even when you're a teenager and your brain hasn't fully developed yet, so much of your attachment or sense of okayness is woven into the fabric of your relationships, whether it's parental, sibling, friends, or like crushes and dates you go on at an early age. And so if there's a breakup, or there's a loss of love, or there's an abandonment, you don't yet have the ability to connect to, and the ability to talk to yourself, like from the inner place of like groundedness and resourcefulness in you, to say like, hey, just because this is happening doesn't mean that there's something wrong about us. This person has their own trauma, their own past, their own history. Like it is not a reflection of you. You don't have that yet. So it just gets internalized as something is wrong with me. Or it's less conscious than that. And it's just like, woo, pain, wall, associate the wall with intimacy, and make sure that doesn't happen again. And so this is a long-winded way of responding to this question, which is just like, begin that first orientation of my biggest enemy is me. That can set you up, interestingly and counterintuitively, for a lifetime of personal development that is essentially just creating more pain, suffering, and internal agitation, where the best case scenario is that you just get really good at compartmentalizing parts of you that you don't like, but there's still an internal struggle deep down. And this is why I have issues with personal growth paths, or even books that frame aspects of you as an enemy. A good example is Ryan Holiday's book, The Ego is the Enemy. And I get that the Stoics have talked about the ego in that way. I get even what that's pointing to and how the ego can get in the way of like a heart's truth. But words matter. And for many people, if you don't have like a nuanced understanding of what that's pointing to, and even if you do, it's still just setting yourself up for war with yourself. And it is not the path to inner peace. A thorough inner peace where you can really be in the fullness of your experience, all aspects of it, all expressions of it, and have space and love that holds it, that softens into it, that allows things to arise and integrate rather than perpetuate toxic patterns of conditioning within us that just keep us clenched or contracted, or repeating negative or painful relational patterns. Like that does not happen by relating to yourself as an enemy, any part of you as an enemy. So that first part of your question, I know that my biggest enemy is me. That's not even the questions, and I just did like a 10-minute talk on it. Let's work on the framing there. And my problem is I don't know how to convince myself not to overthink or judge myself too much. It's an interesting one as well. And the one thing I would look at there is like, I don't know how to convince myself. Who is trying to be convinced and who is doing the convincing? That's the first thing I would look at. And I could kind of just like drop it there. It's almost like a Zen koan. But it's one of the things that inquiry does is it kind of short circuits the brain. It's similar to like, I am my own worst enemy. Like, who is the I that's the enemy, and who is the recipient of that enemy? And it's just like, oh, once you look at that, you sort of just see like, oh, these are like, it's just like thoughts. Like, who is the actual sense of I who is observing all of this? And you'll see then that there's like an impersonal nature to it, that the I, the essential you, is not these like parts going at each other. It's like, oh, I'm doing this to me. It's like actually not that. There's a part of you that is spacious and vast that is watching this all unfold. And interestingly, as you start to anchor more into that, then everything that's happening in the landscape doesn't have the same impact because it's not identified with in the same way. And the source of suffering through and through is the identification with the experience that's arising, with the thought, with the emotion, with the part, with the belief, with the shame. It's the identification with those experiences, that is me, that creates suffering. It's like the foundation of every contemplative practice takes that orientation. So I would just look at like it's like, okay, who is doing the convincing? I don't know how to convince myself not to overthink or judge myself too much. Like, just start with there. And it reminds me of the Eckhart Tolle experience that he describes in the beginning of his book, where he was like in deep pain and depression, and he said something along the lines of like, I don't know how to be with myself anymore. And it just got him realizing, wait, like, who is the I and who is myself? And it kind of, the excuse my language, but the mind fuck of that just like cracked him open into this vaster sense of self that like then spent the next 2 years on a park bench in total bliss, and is now one of the great spiritual teachers of our time. So there's a lot of ways to get into that that bigger understanding of ourselves. But so I would just to make it a little bit more practical here. So we started at the high level, like my biggest enemy is me. Let's start by reframing that. The problem is I don't know how to convince myself not to overthink. Who's doing the convincing and who's trying to be convinced? And then like if we just make it a little bit more practical, I would just relax into like whatever is here that you're perceiving as an issue. Like there's going to be some sort of agitation that is causing the mind to go into, I need to fix this. I need to convince myself not to do this. So let's just say that agitation is anxious thoughts, like thoughts that are arising and that you're frustrated. And now it's like, oh, now there's an enemy, something to be worked with, something that needs to be overcome until I can be happy. Instead of jumping to that, which is another mental position, it's another idea that we attach ourselves to of like, I need this to happen in order to be free. It's interesting. It's masked as wisdom, but it's really just the thinking mind, like a nice idea coming in saying what needs to happen in order to be okay. And it actually keeps us in this roundabout loop. How do you get off of this loop? So you stop and you relax and you expand around it so that you're actually seeing the loop rather than being in the loop. When you're in the thought of, I need to do this, I need to convince myself to not to, that's you in the loop. When you can settle back and just go, oh, here's just another idea. There's a thought, an anxious thought, and then another thought that comes in of, I need to convince myself to stop doing that. And then another thought comes in of, I can't convince myself to stop doing that. It's like, now I need to do this, and I need to whatever. And it just becomes a whole story that you're like, there you go, round and round and round and round and round. And then you'll get some sort of resolution, let's just say, like you convince your mind like, hey, shut up, shut up, shut up. And then mind like gets exhausted after a period of time, and then maybe there's a period of peace and you're like, oh, I did it. But nothing was solved. Something just ran its course for a period of time, or you got really good at suppressing it, and it's like masked, like neutrality or numbness is like now conflated with peace. But you didn't actually change any conditioning. And so what I would suggest there is like when you start feeling that thing, just like, oh, this is an issue. Notice the mind that's saying this is an issue, and just see if you can zoom out so that instead of it being here, just notice, oh yeah, there's thinking, and there's my mind that thinks it's an issue, and I'm just gonna like settle and relax into myself, into the vastness of myself, as if I was the sky, and this little thing is just a cloud moving through it. Just like, oh, okay, oh, there's a thought. What if I didn't have to do anything about it? What if it didn't have to be a problem? What if I could just go, oh, hi, scary thought. Oh, hi, scary feelings. Oh, hi, uncertainty. That's what I would play with to start with. That's how you actually start to unwind some deeper stuff. Everything else is just like, it's just more agitation to the system. And it's not to say that there aren't strategies you can work with that like work to change the thought. I did a whole masterclass on working with thoughts, and we went into that significantly. But the thing I'm seeing here in the question is like there is a lot of over-identification, and there is a lot of things that I think are going to condition more internal war with yourself. And that's the thing I'd encourage you to work with first. Let's see. Okay, so thanks for that question. I'm gonna go for a couple more. how not to allow our past traumas to take control, take away our inner peace and peace with others in our lives. Yeah, great. So there'll be some overlap, I think, with what I just shared, but trauma is significant, and there's a lot of ways to define trauma. In my book, I defined it as, how did I define it? It's interesting. You'd think like when you spend like years writing a book, you would remember every word of it. There's so many things that I'm like, wait, what was I teaching back then? Or like, what was I talking about? What did I write my book on again? But it was something along the lines of like any experience that leaves us feeling less whole. I took a very broad perspective because it's just like there's so many different forms of trauma, complex PTSD, regular PTSD, shock trauma, that like, it's hard to describe it in like very simple ways. But the reality is that trauma is not the event itself. It's how we process and integrate the experience. And through that lens, we can view it as any experience that has happened that has caused us to disconnect with our fundamental wholeness, such that now we continue moving through our lives feeling a little bit more fractured and a little less complete. So if we take that perspective, we're all going to be able to find something in our lives that has had that experience with that residual impact, where it wasn't a post-traumatic growth, where something difficult happened, but we grew and we expanded and we surrendered more. Instead, it caused more contraction, more defensiveness, and more self-questioning. So that's not to minimize, right? Like if we do view trauma on a continuum, it's not to say that like the trauma of something smaller is like the same as like the trauma of great loss when you're young. So I just want to acknowledge that, because we are in a culture where like everything is trauma and everyone is traumatized, and I think there's some problem there. But like, let's just view this as like experiences that have caused us to feel less whole. That is going to create these, we're going to experience it as issues that continue to arise in our life over time, in our own relationships and in our work, in just our quest to feel fulfilled. So how do we work with that? Great plug for the retreat. If you are navigating a lot, and you do feel like there are things that are stuck, that you haven't really had the opportunity to drop in and explore through practices and a supportive container, that is why I do these retreats. They are, my Instagram and TikTok, these are ways to give you little doses of hopefully something that's useful for your mental health and well-being that you can take throughout the day. But they can't replace immersive experiences over the course of hours and days. And the biggest healing experiences I've ever had have all come on retreats, which is why I run retreats. So if you are interested in going deeper into that, then I would love to have you this weekend. And also know that if you're not available this weekend, but you're interested in this topic of inner peace, it's fully recorded. You just have to make sure you sign up beforehand, but then you'll get access to the retreat recordings forever. Like they're yours, lifelong access. And you could go through them at your own pace. Doesn't have to be a full immersion. You go like an hour at a time. So if you're interested in that, the link's in my bio and here. But I'm just going to talk, since there's so much that goes into it, I just want to talk about it through the lens of like more intense traumas, where maybe you've tried to meditate, maybe you've tried different forms of personal growth or like positive thinking or like working with your thoughts, but there's like something that just keeps coming up. In that case, you might need more of a trauma specialty. And my go-to recommendations for that, for like starting to decouple the emotional charge from the memory that's getting activated in real time, would be EMDR, which will help desensitize and dampen that emotional response to like a specific event. and somatic experiencing, which really helps cover when trauma gets stuck in the body, which is why you can have a traumatic experience and then spend a ton of time just trying to be positive, focus on what's good, but it's like rowing up a stream while your boat is still attached to the dock. Just like, why can't I get anywhere with this? Because the actual trauma and where it's stored in the body is not being addressed. And so somatic experiencing really helps the unwinding of that. I'll also give a plug for MDMA-assisted therapy, which I don't think, those trials I think are just about to be approved. All the clinical trials are almost done. And so that should be like legal within a therapeutic context soon. But you can like sign up to try and do clinical trials for MDMA-assisted therapy. If you're not familiar with MDMA, the street name of that is ecstasy. So many of us associate it with like raves and partying and sex. And it's this, and you want to be careful, of course, with any sort of substance. And I'm not condoning doing this, especially psychedelics, outside of a supervised container with someone who is trained. But what MDMA does, and the reason people have loved it so much in like rave type settings, is that it fills you with love. And why it's so powerful in healing contexts, like they're using it for PTSD, but even beyond that, is that it creates an internal container of safety and groundedness and okayness that allows you to orient toward aspects of you that have been wounded. So that those wounds you can let the light in, so to speak. You can let the love touch them. Like, just think about how healing it is, or powerful it is, like when you're just like in fear and loneliness, and like someone you care about just gives you the warmest hug and love, and just like, I am here for you, like I've got you, and you can just surrender into that. The part of you that is in fear just like feels so supportive, and there's something so healing and grounding about that. Well, imagine going to like a core wound of abandonment or fear or whatever the trauma was, and just allowing that to be completely infused with love and care, and remembering that it's basically just someone saying like, you are so safe. I am so here for you. You do not have to go through this alone. You are okay. The reason that is so hard to do, often outside of these substances, is because it takes a lot to build the internal and the external scaffold, like with a therapist, to actually descend and get close enough to those trauma wounds, such that you're able to like actually see them first of all, but like be in the space of them to even do the work of like relaxing around them and showing them love. And things like MDMA are like a fast track to doing that. It's like gives you this built-in container of safety that allows you to go in, which is why I'm like extremely excited about this becoming more mainstream. Ketamine is already approved, and it's been around for a while, and is massively good for depression, but also trauma. And so I would explore that as well. That can be expensive, but there are different forms of it, and sometimes it can be covered by insurance. So if you want to explore the substance route, MDMA-assisted therapy, ketamine-assisted therapy, and more traditional would be somatic experiencing, EMDR. And with all of these, I think meditation is extremely supportive for both the building the internal container to move closer to these experiences, and the thing that allows for the ongoing integration of these experiences once you've had a healing and an insight, which is why I still teach it and stand by it. It's because you can have these substances that like and these one-time experiences that show you that you're loved and held, and they allow for big healing. But the ongoing work is still like, how do you become the steady source of groundedness and care and like an inner parent for your ongoing experience? One-time substance experience or awakening experience, for the most part, is not going to do that. That's like a continued reconditioning of how you meet your moment-to-moment experience. So, again, and that's going to be a big part of what we go into this weekend, of how to create that inner steadiness that allows you to just be with the fullness of your life in a way that's just like, there's space, like there's groundedness, there's love, there's care, there's acceptance, there's self-trust. If we are just bundled in our own trigger and our over-identification with what's moving through us, it's impossible to do that work. And so there's an unwinding that needs to happen, there's a repair of self-trust that needs to happen, and there's a re-identification that needs to happen that that takes time and immersion, and that's what we're going to be doing this weekend. Okay, let's see what else is coming through. Cool. How to stop ruminating and push into peace. Stop trying to push into peace would be the first recommendation there. Instead, just like relax into it. I won't talk too much about rumination because we've talked about it in different ways. But first step would just be like, notice how rumination can be there. It doesn't have to be the defining thing of you. And there's a part of you that can just relax and watch the mind going in all these different directions as if you were watching the stock market ticker tape just move by. It's like, whoa, 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 so fast, so fast, so fast. And it's just like you are just getting more and more anchored in the observer of that experience. Okay. Cool. I'm going to keep going down. Ooh, lots of comments. Great. Sorry for the pause. Just want to find something. How to heal addiction. I'm not an addiction specialist, but I do take the perspective that it's less about healing the addiction and more about healing the pain that is causing it. And so just first having an honest inquiry about what is the pain underneath, and looking at what does that pain need. And yeah, for that reason, that is something that we will be exploring in a big way this week. All right, I'll take about five more minutes here and just talk a little bit about the retreat for those who are interested. It's going to be Friday night. If you want to do the live version, it'll be Friday night through Sunday late afternoon. It's about 12 hours worth of teaching content that has all different meditations, teachings from me, Q&A opportunity where you can ask a personal question to me live. We'll explore some movement on one of the days. If you look at the schedule on the website, you'll see like sessions that are optional that you don't have to attend. And if at any point like you don't want to show up live, that's fine. The recordings are available 30 minutes of the conclusion of each session. In addition to the teachings, which will include like we'll be looking at things like forgiveness and holding grudges and resentment, things that create a lot of internal agitation that often make us feel stuck in just loops of contraction and pain and bracing against the world. We're really going to get nitty-gritty with that. So in addition to all of that, there's also a ton of follow-up resources that all participants get for free as part of attending. I'm just going to read through some of those. These include things like my 31-day mindfulness and positive psychology course, where every day you get an audio meditation, audio teaching, and a meditation. You'll get 3 relaxation meditations. There's going to be a customized meditation for inner peace that you can use each day if you just want one thing like to follow up from the retreat that you can use to anchor in the teachings. That's only available at this retreat. It'll be created, customized for the retreat. You're going to get a meditation for working with inner demons, how to befriend them and integrate them, a deep rest meditation, a 30-minute video teaching on the 3 stages of relaxation, 5 different sleep meditations, 10-day deep sleep course, 7-day anti-anxiety coaching series, 8-page mindfulness starter kit, and a 30-minute partner meditation. So all of this is included as part of your registration for the retreat. So there's a lot there. And after the retreat, you get a full resource list, which those who have attended my retreats, you always know, like I do pretty in-depth notes of the retreats, of the key point. I've since hired a note taker who will be following through as we're going and taking in-depth notes on the content. So that if you want to review like a written version of it, that will be included on the resource page as well once the retreat is over. So there's a ton here, and you have lifelong access to it. You could go through the recordings of this like for the rest of your life, revisit it. Many people do. You get an audio version and the video version of the sessions. And yeah, I mean, you could read the testimonials on the website if you want to learn more. But I'm more interested in, like, is the frequency of this topic resonating for you at this point in time? Does this feel like a journey that you want to step into, that you're ready for, that you feel called to at this moment? And if so, then to trust that. That is how my personal growth journey has gone. It's always been like, there's something here, and I'm kind of confused by it, but I feel pulled to explore it more deeply. That's what took me to Burma to live as a monk. I had no idea what it meant to do that. I was like, something about 6 months of silence in a monastery. It's just like, I don't know why, but that feels like the next step, and I followed it. And so if you're feeling that with this, I'd love to have you there. I do think it's important that we invest in our own well-being. And it's part of feeling like energetically connected to the work that we're doing. And I also recognize that sometimes we're in life stages where it's just literally not possible. The resources are not there. And if that is the case, we do have partial scholarships available for those who would not otherwise be able to attend, which is different, again, from like being scared to invest some money to do something like this. So if that is the case, you could not attend otherwise, then you could reach out at Corey@limindfulness.com and inquire and just share what's arising for you and the need. And we'll share some details about applying for partial scholarships. In other words, like we'll make it happen for you if you genuinely want to be there. That's all for now. Thanks everyone. I'll just look through some of the comments here as we're going. But really nice to read your words, and great to have you here. I appreciate you spending some time with me, and I would love to work more closely with you this weekend at the retreat. I've done about 10 of them. They're special experiences, and if you've been following along here and you want to experience what that's like, a more immersive opportunity, then this is the chance. So the details for that are at the link in my bio on both TikTok and Instagram, CoreyMascara.com/retreat. And if you do sign up, send me a DM, and I'll look forward to seeing you there. Thanks so much, everyone. Big love. Take care.